The heavy oak door of the penthouse office muffled the sounds within, but not entirely. A sharp thud, followed by a woman's stifled cry, made Jack Reynolds pause, mid-stride, in the dimly lit hallway. He stood motionless in his navy blue security uniform, the cleaning cart before him, forgotten. Every muscle in his body tensed as he fixed his gaze on the door. The muted sounds of struggle continued from within. Jack was just a security guard now, a ghost paid to patrol the empty corridors of Harper Enterprises after hours, invisible, forgettable, just as he had carefully designed his life to be for the past 5 years. The badge on his chest read security, but it revealed nothing of the man who wore it. Nothing of the warrior who had spent 18 years as a Navy SEAL. Nothing of the medic who had saved countless lives in combat zones across the globe. Nothing of the husband who had lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago. His hand moved instinctively toward his hip, where a sidearm should have been. He caught himself. Here in this gleaming tower of glass and steel, he carried only a flashlight and a radio. The sounds grew louder, a crash, glass breaking, a whimper that could only belong to a child. Before Jack could decide his next move, the massive door cracked open just enough for a small figure to slip through. A little girl, no older than 7, stumbled into the hallway chest, heaving with silent sobs. Her blonde hair was disheveled, her pink dress rumpled. She spotted Jack, standing there a shadow with a security badge, and froze. Then she ran, not away from him as he expected, but toward him. She didn't scream. Her terror was too profound for that. She grabbed the fabric of his uniform pants with 2 small, trembling hands, looked up at him with wide, desperate eyes, and delivered the words that would end his quiet life forever. "They're killing my mom. Please help her." The words hit Jack with the force of a shock wave, shattering the quiet discipline of his carefully constructed new life. In that instant, 5 years of practiced invisibility evaporated. The security guard was gone. The SEAL was back. "Stay behind me." He set his voice a low, steady rumble that cut through the child's fear. He didn't wait for an answer. He guided her behind his cart and pushed the penthouse door inward. The scene inside was a collision of luxury and brutality. Sprawled across the vast office that overlooked the glittering city skyline, 4 large men in dark suits were cornering a woman. Catherine Harper. Jack recognized her from the corporate photos in the lobby. CEO of Harper Enterprises, a rising star in the business world, a woman who had built an empire from the ground up. She was on her feet, but barely. A nasty cut bled freely above her eye, and her lip was split. Her elegant business suit was torn at the shoulder. She fought with the ferocity of a cornered lioness, her movements sharp and defiant, but she was exhausted, and her attackers were closing in with professional precision. One of them held a thin black cord. Jack moved without sound. The first man closest to the door never saw him coming. Jack's hand shot out, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it in a way nature never intended. A sharp snap echoed in the room as the man's arm broke. Jack used the man's own momentum to spin him around, creating a human shield between himself and the others, then drove him face first into the wall. The attacker crumpled to the thick, expensive carpet without a sound. The other 3 turned eyes wide with shock. A security guard. Their momentary confusion was all the opening Jack needed. He surged forward, a blur of motion. The second man swung a clumsy, powerful punch. Jack sidestepped it effortlessly, his hand chopping down on the man's collarbone. The bone gave way with a sickening crack, and the man went down, howling in pain. The third attacker was more cautious. He pulled a small, weighted blackjack from his jacket. Too slow. Jack closed the distance, his foot sweeping the man's legs from under him. As he fell, Jack delivered a precise, calculated strike to the side of his neck. The man's eyes rolled back, and he was unconscious before he hit the ground. The last man, clearly the leader, backed away, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. He reached inside his jacket, but Jack was already on him. He grabbed the man's arm, preventing the draw, and slammed his palm up under the man's nose. The cartilage crunched. The man staggered back, eyes watering, disoriented. Jack followed, hooking his leg behind the man's and driving him backward over a low-slung leather sofa. The man's head hit the marble floor with a dull, final thud. Silence descended upon the room, broken only by the ragged sound of Catherine Harper's breathing. She stared at Jack, her one good eye wide with astonishment, before her knees finally buckled. Jack caught her before she hit the floor. his combat training shifting seamlessly from offense to triage. He swept her into his arms and carried her to the sofa, laying her down gently. The combat medic took over, now his hands moving with practiced calm. "My daughter," Catherine rasped, her voice barely audible. "She's safe," Jack said, his tone reassuring but firm. His fingers went to her neck, checking her pulse. It was thready too fast. He tilted her head back gently, ensuring her airway was clear. Her pupils were unequal, a clear sign of a concussion. He ran his hands over her skull, feeling for fractures, his touch both professional and surprisingly gentle. He saw the deep bruising on her ribs where they had struck her. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, keeping his voice level. "Catherine Harper." She managed her breath, catching. "Good, Catherine. You have a serious concussion and possibly broken ribs. I need to get you out of here." He saw the discarded cord on the floor. He recognized the heavy, methodical nature of the bruises. This wasn't a robbery. It was a professional targeted hit. Calling building security, or even 911, was a gamble he couldn't take. The people who sent these men would have eyes and ears everywhere. They would be expecting an official response. They wouldn't be expecting a security guard to walk her out the back door. Jack stood and walked back to the office entrance. The little girl was peeking around the edge of the cleaning cart, her small face streaked with tears. He knelt down, bringing himself to her level. "It's okay now," he said softly. "Those men can't hurt your mom anymore, but we have to be very quiet. We're going to play a game. The quiet game. Can you do that for me?" The girl nodded, her eyes fixed on him, fragile trust forming in their depths. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily," she whispered. "Good girl, Lily. I'm Jack. I'm going to take care of you and your mom." He returned to Catherine, who was struggling to stay conscious. "I'm getting you out of here," he said. "It's the only way." "Where?" she whispered, her consciousness fading. "Someplace safe." He slid his arms beneath her, one under her knees, the other supporting her back. She was lighter than he expected. As he lifted her, she gave a soft moan of pain, but didn't protest. He looked around the opulent office one last time, at the 4 unconscious men scattered amongst the symbols of immense wealth and power. 5 years he had worked so hard to leave the world of violence behind, to build a quiet life for his own daughter. And in 5 minutes it was all undone. He walked to the door, Catherine held securely in his arms. Lily followed close behind, her small hand clutching the back of his uniform pants. His knowledge of this building wasn't of boardrooms and stock prices, but of service elevators, forgotten stairwells, and the labyrinthine corridors of the sub-basement. His past had taught him how to fight and how to heal. His present was about to give them a way to escape. He would take them to the only place he knew was secure. He would take them home. The service elevator whirred in the echoing silence of the concrete shaft, its slow descent a stark contrast to the frantic beating of Jack's heart. He held Catherine securely, her head resting against his shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady. Beside him, Lily clutched a fistful of his uniform pants, her small knuckles white. Her eyes, wide and dark, darted around the bare metal walls of the elevator, taking in the strange hidden world beneath the one she knew. "It's okay," Jack murmured, his voice barely disturbing the quiet. "This is my secret passageway. Not many people know about it." Lily looked up at him, a flicker of awe replacing some of the fear. She nodded, accepting his words with the simple faith of a child. The elevator shuddered to a halt in the sub-basement. The air here was cool and smelled of damp concrete and motor oil. Jack shifted Catherine's weight, listening intently. He could hear the distant hum of the building's main generators and the faint, rhythmic clank of pipes somewhere deep in the labyrinth. No voices, no footsteps. They were alone. He moved with a quiet, purposeful stride through the maze of corridors, following a path he had walked 1,000 times during his security rounds. His keycard granted him access through a series of locked maintenance doors, each one taking them further from the opulent lobby and closer to the freedom of the loading docks. They paused once, flattening themselves into a dark alcove as the crackle of a radio echoed from an intersecting hallway. Jack held his breath, shielding the 2 females with his body until the footsteps faded away. He felt Lily tremble against his leg and placed a calming hand on her head. Finally, a heavy steel door led them out into the chilled night air of a deserted alley. The sudden wash of streetlights felt like a spotlight. Jack's old pickup truck, a dented but reliable Ford, was parked in its designated employee spot at the far end of the lot. It was an ugly, unassuming vehicle. the perfect camouflage. He gently placed Catherine in the passenger seat, buckling her in carefully before lifting a wide-eyed Lily onto the bench seat beside her mother. The drive from the glittering towers of the financial district to his working-class neighborhood was a journey across worlds. The gleaming facades of corporate power gave way to brick-faced apartment buildings and the warm, scattered lights of corner stores. Catherine remained unconscious, oblivious to the transition from her world to his. Jack's apartment was on the third floor of a modest walk-up. The hallway was narrow and smelled faintly of his neighbor's cooking. He balanced Catherine in one arm while fumbling for his keys, Lily, and the weight of the world on his shoulders. He pushed the door open to a scene of comforting domesticity. The living room was small but tidy, dominated by a large, overflowing bookshelf and a comfortable-looking armchair. The television was playing a cartoon at low volume. His 9-year-old daughter, Emma, was sitting on the floor showing a picture book to Mrs. Martinez, their elderly, kind-hearted neighbor, who watched Emma when Jack worked nights. They both looked up as he entered. Mrs. Martinez's warm smile faltered, replaced by a gasp of shock. Emma's eyes grew wide as she saw the unconscious woman in her father's arms, and the terrified little girl hiding behind him. "Jack, my heavens, what happened?" Mrs. Martinez exclaimed, rising to her feet. "There was an accident at work," Jack said, his voice calm, and even betraying none of the adrenaline still coursing through him. He carried Catherine past them down the short hallway to his own bedroom. "She fell. She needs help." He laid Catherine down on his bed, the simple quilt, a stark contrast to the expensive silk of her blouse. Emma crept to the doorway, her expression a mixture of fear and concern. "Daddy, is she okay?" Jack came back and knelt in front of his daughter, placing his hands on her shoulders. "She's hurt, sweetie, but she's going to be okay. I need you to be a big girl for me right now. Can you do that?" Emma nodded solemnly. "This is Lily," he said gently, guiding the younger girl forward. "She's very scared. I need you to help me look after her." Emma's gaze softened as she looked at the younger girl. She gave Lily a small, shy smile and held out her hand. "Hi, Lily. I'm Emma. Do you want to see my drawings?" Lily hesitated for a moment, then let go of Jack's pants and took Emma's hand. Jack turned to Mrs. Martinez, pulling his wallet from his back pocket. "Thank you for staying late, Maria. I'm sorry to rush you out." He pressed twice her usual payment into her hand. "But Jack, should we call an ambulance?" She whispered, her eyes full of concern. "No," he said firmly. "I've already checked her over. I have some training. A hospital is the last thing she needs right now. Please, Maria, I can handle this. I just need you to go home and not mention this to anyone. It's very important." Mrs. Martinez looked from Jack's steady, serious face to the two little girls now sitting side by side on the rug. She had known him since Emma was a toddler. She trusted him. She gave a slow, reluctant nod. "All right, dear, if you're sure. Call me if you need anything. Anything at all." After she left, Jack locked the door, sliding the deadbolt and chain into place. The sound echoed in the quiet apartment. He retrieved a large professional-grade medical kit from the back of his closet, a ghost from his old life, and returned to the bedroom. He worked under the soft glow of a bedside lamp, cleaning and dressing the cut on Catherine's forehead. He checked her ribs, relieved to find them bruised, not broken. The concussion was his main concern. He carefully monitored her breathing and pulse, his focus absolute. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't notice Catherine's eyelids flutter open. Her vision was blurry, swimming in and out of focus. She saw the unfamiliar pattern of a ceiling, the soft, yellow light. A man was leaning over her, his touch surprisingly gentle, as he taped a bandage to her head. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She tried to push herself up, a strangled cry escaping her lips. Jack's hands came up open and pacifying. "Easy. You're safe. Just lie still." Her unfocused eyes tried to place him. The navy uniform shirt, the worn lines on his face, the quiet authority in his voice. This wasn't a doctor. This wasn't a hospital. The last thing she remembered was pain and the face of one of the men snarling at her. "Where am I?" She whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. "Who are you?" "My name is Jack Reynolds. I work security at your building. Your daughter came and got me." The words seemed to hang in the air, nonsensical. Her daughter, Lily. The memory crashed back into her. The office, the men, their cold eyes, the brutal, shocking pain. Lily's scream. "Lily, She gasped, her heart seizing. "Where is my daughter? Is she all right?" "She's right here. She's safe," Jack assured her. He turned his head toward the doorway. "Emma, can you bring Lily in here for a minute?" A moment later, two small figures appeared in the doorway. Emma, a girl with her father's serious eyes, stood slightly in front, holding Lily's hand. Lily herself looked small and lost in the unfamiliar hallway, but she was unharmed. Her eyes lit up when she saw her mother was awake. "Mommy!" She rushed to the bedside. "Oh, baby!" Catherine breathed tears of relief, blurring her already hazy vision. She reached out her hand, trembling, and brushed Lily's hair back from her forehead. Seeing her child whole and unhurt was the only thing that mattered. It was an anchor in the swirling chaos of her mind. It was the first thing that made her believe she might actually be safe. She looked from her daughter's face to the man standing calmly by the bed. Jack Reynolds, the security guard. She had seen him before, a fleeting presence in the hallways, late at night when she was working. A man in a Navy uniform, someone she had never given a second thought. Now the memory of him moving through her office, a silent, brutally efficient force of nature, clashed with the image of the quiet father in this humble apartment. "You saved us," she said, the realization dawning. "I did what anyone would have done." He deflected his gaze steady. "No," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of its usual strength. "They don't." She looked down at her bandaged hands, at the dull ache spreading through her body. "Why didn't you call the police?" "An ambulance. Because the men who attacked you weren't common criminals," Jack said, simply, his voice low so the children wouldn't overhear. "They were professionals. People like that don't work for someone who can't control the aftermath. Calling 911 would have been like sending up a flare. They'd have known exactly where you were. This way you just vanished." The cold, calculated logic of his words settled over her. He was right. Whoever had sent them would be monitoring official channels. They would be expecting a frantic call, a police report, a hospital admission. They would not be expecting her to disappear into the night with a security guard. The thought was both terrifying and brilliant. For the first time since waking up, Catherine truly looked at her surroundings. She saw the worn but clean furniture, the neatly stacked books, the faint smell of soap and cinnamon that seemed to cling to the air. She saw the way his daughter Emma sat with Lily on the floor, showing her a doll with quiet, gentle patience. This was a home, a sanctuary. "I need to make a call," she said, the CEO in her reasserting itself. "My head of security, my lawyer." "Your phone was smashed in the attack," Jack interrupted gently, "and even if it wasn't using it, would be the first thing they'd track. You have to assume they can access your call logs, your location, everything. For now you're a ghost. It's the only thing keeping you and your daughter safe." The feeling of utter helplessness was foreign to her, and she hated it. Her entire life was built on control, on having the resources and power to solve any problem. Now she had nothing. She was injured, trapped in a stranger's apartment, her life and her child's life dependent on the very man she would have overlooked yesterday. He seemed to read the conflict on her face. He left the room and returned a moment later with a glass of water and 2 pills. "For the pain," he said, placing them on the bedside table. "You have a severe concussion, Catherine, and badly bruised ribs. You need to rest." The sound of her first name from his lips felt strangely intimate, yet his tone was nothing but professional. He was a medic, tending to a patient. She watched his hands as he adjusted the pillow behind her back. They were strong, calloused, but his movements were deft and sure. There was a confidence in him, a stillness she had only ever seen in the most disciplined and powerful men. But his power wasn't loud or boastful. It was a quiet, unshakable core. She lay back, the exhaustion washing over her in waves. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the events. The argument on the phone, the sudden violent entry of the men, their cold, determined faces. They weren't there to rob her. They were there for her. And there was only one person in the world with the resources and utter ruthlessness to order an attack like that. One person who had been trying to control her for months, whose proposals had become more like threats with each refusal. Victor Blackstone. She whispered the name, tasting like poison on her tongue. Jack, who had been quietly watching her from the doorway, gave a single slow nod. The name clearly meant nothing to him, but the look on her face told him everything he needed to know. She had just identified the monster in the dark. "He won't stop," Catherine said, a new wave of fear washing over her. "He's not just going to let me disappear. He will hunt me down." "Let him hunt," Jack said, his voice a low, steady anchor in her storm. "He's looking for a CEO. He won't think to look for her in a security guard's apartment." Catherine awoke to the unfamiliar smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was in a hotel, a comforting delusion that shattered as soon as she tried to move. A chorus of aches answered, reminding her of everything. She wasn't in a hotel. She was in a security guard's apartment, a fugitive in her own city. She pushed herself up slowly, her head pounding a dull, rhythmic beat. The navy uniform shirt she'd seen on Jack last night was draped over a chair, and a clean folded t-shirt and a pair of gray sweatpants were left at the foot of the bed. They were worn but soft, a quiet offering of comfort. After changing, she followed the sounds of quiet activity into the living room. The scene that greeted her was one of surreal domesticity. Jack stood at the small stove in the adjoining kitchen, flipping pancakes with an easy, practiced motion. At the small dining table, Emma was patiently showing Lily how to draw a horse, her brow furrowed in concentration. Lily, for her part, was completely absorbed, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time since the ordeal began. The morning sunlight streamed through the single large window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and casting a warm glow over the entire scene. "Good morning," Jack said, not turning around. He had heard her approach. Of course he had. The man seemed to notice everything. "There's coffee and breakfast will be ready in a minute." She murmured her thanks, feeling like an intruder. She poured herself a mug of coffee, the warmth a welcome comfort in her hands. She watched him move around the small kitchen, his efficiency just as palpable here as it had been in her office. He was a man comfortable in his own skin, in his own space. He brought a plate of pancakes to the table for her. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was hit by a truck," she answered honestly. "But better." Her eyes drifted to the girls. "She seems okay." "Kids are resilient," Jack said, sitting down across from her. "And Emma is a good big sister." A comfortable silence settled between them as they ate. It was Catherine who finally broke it, the question burning in her mind. "You said you had some training. That wasn't some training, Jack. What you did last night, who are you?" Jack took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze distant for a moment. "A long time ago, I was a Navy SEAL, 18 years. I served as a combat medic. I spent most of my career in places most people only see on the news." The confession landed with a quiet thud, yet it explained everything. The calm under fire, the tactical precision, the medical knowledge. "What happened? Why are you—" She trailed off, not wanting to sound insulting. "My wife Sarah, she got sick," he said, his eyes flicking to a photo on the shelf. "Cancer. I came home, spent every last minute I could with her. After she passed, the old job didn't make sense anymore. Emma needed a father, not a ghost who called once a month from halfway around the world. So I chose this. It's quiet. It pays the bills. And I'm here to pick her up from school every day. That's all that matters." His simple, powerful declaration of love for his daughter struck a chord deep within Catherine. Her own life was a whirlwind of board meetings, international flights, and shareholder calls. She had nannies, drivers, tutors, an entire staff to manage Lily's life because she was so rarely present herself. In that moment, she felt a pang of something that felt dangerously close to envy for this man's simple, purposeful life. She told him then about Victor Blackstone, about his relentless pursuit, his cold ambition, and his absolute refusal to take no for an answer. She explained how his obsession had escalated from hostile business tactics to this monstrous act of violence. As she spoke, Jack's expression remained unreadable, but his jaw was tight. "So he thinks he can break you, force you to give him what he wants. It's all he's ever known, taking what he wants." After breakfast, Jack turned on the small television to a local news channel, keeping the volume low. As the girls played, he and Catherine watched. 20 minutes into the broadcast, a news anchor gave a brief report. An incident at the Harper Enterprises Tower overnight is being attributed to a major electrical fault. The building was briefly evacuated, but officials report the situation is now under control. Harper Enterprises has not yet released a statement. Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. An electrical fault. Blackstone was already rewriting history, erasing the attack, burying the truth under a mountain of lies. It was a terrifying display of his influence. "He controls the narrative," she whispered. "He's making it so what happened to me never even happened." As if on cue, the landline phone on the wall jangled a harsh, intrusive sound in the quiet apartment. Jack's body went still. He looked at the phone, then at Catherine. He hadn't used that line in months. He picked up the receiver, his eyes watchful. "Hello?" There was a brief pause on the other end, just long enough to be unnerving. Then a smooth, cold voice spoke. "Is a Mr. Henderson there?" "No," Jack replied, his voice level. "You have the wrong number." "My apologies," the voice said, and the line went dead. Jack slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. He didn't need to explain. Catherine understood. It was a probing call, a test. They had his name from the employee files. They had his address. And now they had his number. They were casting their net. He walked to the window, peering cautiously through a slit in the blinds. Across the street, a black sedan was parked. It wasn't flashy, but it was out of place in his neighborhood of aging family cars and work vans. Two men sat inside, their faces obscured, but their purpose was unmistakable. They were watching. Jack stepped back from the window. The quiet calm in his demeanor was replaced by a hardened focus. The sanctuary was breached. Their time here was over. "They found us," Catherine stated, her voice trembling slightly. "They found the security guard," Jack corrected, his voice dangerously quiet. "They have no idea who they're dealing with." He looked at their daughters playing peacefully on the floor, completely unaware of the wolves circling outside. "Pack a bag. We're leaving." There was no time for debate, no room for fear. Jack moved with an urgency that was both terrifying and deeply reassuring. "Emma, pack your school bag, your favorite book, your drawing pad, and your warmest sweater. Nothing else," he commanded gently. He then turned to Catherine. "There's a small duffel bag in my closet. Put anything you can find for you and Lily in it. 5 minutes." While they scrambled to follow his orders, Jack worked. He took a cheap prepaid burner phone from a drawer, a relic of a past he never truly shed, and dialed a local pizza place. He ordered 2 large pepperoni pizzas to his address, giving his apartment number clearly, and asking for the driver to call him from the lobby. A simple, classic diversion. The men in the sedan would be watching the front entrance, waiting for a delivery boy, expecting the ordinary. They would never be looking at the rusty fire escape at the back of the building. From a locked footlocker under his bed, he pulled a tightly packed canvas bag, his go bag. It was heavy with essentials he hadn't needed in 5 years, but had never discarded. Cash, a multi-tool, a high-powered flashlight, a water purification kit, and a far more comprehensive medical kit than the one he kept in the closet. The sight of it was like seeing a ghost. "Time to go," he said, his voice low. The apartment's back window led to the fire escape. It overlooked a dingy alleyway filled with overflowing dumpsters. It was a 3-story drop down a series of narrow, rickety metal stairs. Lily whimpered at the sight of it, her small hands clutching Catherine's leg. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. Catherine knelt, her own fear masked by a sudden, fierce maternal calm. "Yes, you can, sweetie. It's a game, a secret mission. We have to be spies and not let the bad guys see us." Jack was already out on the platform, his footing sure on the groaning metal. He turned and held his arms out for Lily. "I've got you," he said, his voice a steady promise. "I will not let you fall." After a moment of hesitation, Lily let her mother guide her into Jack's strong arms. He held her securely against his chest and started down, moving with a fluid, practiced grace. Catherine handed him the duffel bag and then helped Emma, who was trying her best to be brave, through the window. Catherine was last, her movements clumsy from her injuries, her heart pounding with a mixture of pain and adrenaline. When her foot slipped on a patch of wet metal, Jack's hand was instantly there, his grip like iron on her arm, steadying her. For a heartbeat, their eyes met in the dim light of the alley, a shared moment of fear-trust and reliance. They reached the bottom just as they heard the pizza delivery guy buzzing the front door of the building, a perfect distraction. Jack led them through a maze of back alleys he knew as well as the hallways of Catherine's tower. Each turn took them further from the watched street, deeper into the city's anonymous arteries. They boarded a city bus, 4 quiet shadows amidst the morning commuters, and rode it 10 stops before getting off and melting into another neighborhood. An hour later, they stood before a locked, graffiti-covered garage. Jack keyed in a code, and the door rumbled open, revealing not a car, but a dusty, powerful-looking SUV with tinted windows. "It's not ideal," Jack said, anticipating Catherine's question, "but it's not registered to me, and it's the last thing they'll be looking for." Emma surprisingly beamed. Is this the secret car you told me about, Daddy? The drive was tense and quiet. Jack drove the SUV with practiced precision, constantly checking the mirrors for any sign of pursuit. Catherine sat beside him, her mind racing with the implications of what was happening. The two girls huddled together in the back seat, speaking in hushed tones about their favorite animals, and colors finding common ground in their shared adventure. They drove for 2 hours, leaving the city lights far behind, climbing into the dark, pine-covered mountains that bordered the state. Finally, they turned down a long, unpaved road, the SUV's headlights cutting a lone path through the dense forest. They came to a stop before a small rustic cabin barely visible among the trees. It was utterly isolated. My father built this place, Jack explained, his voice softer now. We used to come up here when I was a kid. Inside the cabin was one large room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and a sleeping loft. It was filled with the ghosts of a simpler life. Faded photographs on the mantelpiece, a stack of old board games, a handmade rocking chair. It was the complete opposite of Catherine's cold, minimalist penthouse. This was a home built of love, not just wood. The exhaustion of the last 24 hours hit them all at once. The girls, worn out from fear and travel, fell asleep almost instantly on the bunk beds in the loft. The adrenaline finally drained from Catherine's body, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary ache. She stood by the large picture window, looking out at the black, impenetrable wall of trees. Jack came to stand beside her, a respectful distance between them. The only sound was the gentle crackle of the fire he had just started in the hearth. They were safe for now, a tiny island of warmth and light in an ocean of darkness. "We can't run forever, Jack," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. She was done being a victim. What do we do now? Jack's gaze followed Catherine's out the window into the vast, silent darkness of the forest. Her question, "What do we do now?" hung in the air, a challenge and a plea. For the first time since this ordeal began, he saw the CEO in her re-emerge, not in the form of demands or arrogance, but as a cool, analytical mind ready to face a problem. "First," he said, turning from the window, his voice dropping into the quiet, authoritative tone of a mission briefing, "we make sure we're secure." He spent the next hour moving through the small cabin with methodical purpose that Catherine found both fascinating and calming. He checked the locks on the heavy wooden door and the single window, wedging a small piece of wood into the frame of the latter to prevent it from being slid open from the outside. He walked the perimeter outside his dark form, disappearing into the trees, returning minutes later with a report. "One road in and we can see it from the loft window for half a mile. No close neighbors. The forest is too thick for an easy approach on foot. For now, this is a good position." He was no longer a security guard, nor just a father. He was a protector, surveying his territory. He returned to the fireplace, where she stood the warmth of the flames, doing little to chase away her internal chill. "Now your turn," he said. "Tell me about this man, Victor Blackstone. Not the businessman. The man. What are his weaknesses?" The question shifted the dynamic between them. He was deferring to her expertise, to her battlefield. For the next hour, she laid out the architecture of her enemy. Victor Blackstone was 55, brilliant, ambitious, and utterly amoral. His company, Blackstone Industries, had fingers in defense contracts, pharmaceuticals, and technology. His greatest strength was also his greatest weakness, his ego. "He's a narcissist," Catherine explained, pacing in front of the fire. "He needs to be seen as a titan, a visionary. His public image is everything to him. He spent a fortune cultivating it. He buys respectability, sits on charity boards, endows university wings. It's all a performance." "So the one thing he can't afford is a public scandal," Jack concluded, "especially not one involving a violent assault and attempted murder." She agreed, a hard edge to her voice. "If I could prove what he did, I could ruin him. But it's my word against his, and my word is currently coming from a ghost he's already erased." 20 miles away, in a penthouse that made Catherine's look modest, Victor Blackstone stood at a floor-to-ceiling window, swirling amber liquid in a crystal glass. At 55, he cut an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with the lean physique of a man who paid others to maintain his body. His tailored suit cost more than Jack earned in 3 months. Behind him, a man in a dark suit stood rigidly at attention, afraid to speak first. Finally, Blackstone turned, his aristocratic features arranged in a mask of controlled fury. "Let me understand this clearly," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "4 of your men, hand-picked professionals, were incapacitated by a security guard, and now Catherine Harper has vanished. We tracked the guard to his apartment, sir," the man replied, sweat beading on his forehead. "Name's Jack Reynolds, former military, we think. By the time we positioned surveillance, he'd already fled with the woman and her daughter." "And who exactly is this Jack Reynolds?" Blackstone demanded, setting down his glass with deliberate care. "We're compiling a full profile now, sir. Preliminary background shows 18 years in the Navy, likely Special Forces. Widower. 1 daughter. No financial assets of note, just an ordinary security guard." "No one ordinary neutralizes 4 of your best men," Blackstone said coldly. "Find him, find her, and make them both disappear, permanently." He turned back to the window. "We're 24 hours from announcing my Senate campaign. I want this mess cleaned up before I take the podium." "Yes, sir. We're deploying all resources, tracking cell signals, financial transactions, surveillance cameras. We'll find them." "See that you do. Catherine Harper has information that could be inconvenient. I can't have her speaking to the press." Alone again, Blackstone opened a desk drawer and removed a small framed photograph. It showed Catherine at a charity gala, elegant in a blue evening gown. His fingers traced her face with possessive intensity, his eyes darkening with obsession. "You should have said yes, Catherine," he whispered. "We could have ruled together. Now you'll disappear like all my other problems." Back in the cabin, Catherine and Jack formulated a plan. They needed an ally, someone on the outside, someone utterly incorruptible and completely loyal. Not her corporate lawyer who was brilliant, but part of the system Blackstone could manipulate. Not her head of security who was good, but whose team could have a weak link. "Walter Hayes," Catherine said suddenly. "He was my father's lawyer, my mentor. He's retired now, lives up in the mountains himself. He's 75, sharp as a razor, and he despises men like Blackstone. If there's one person I can trust with my life, it's him." The problem was contacting him. Jack retrieved the go bag and produced one of the burner phones. "This is our one shot. We make the call, we keep it under 30 seconds, and then this phone becomes a paperweight. Anyone trying to trace it will only get a ping off a cell tower 10 miles from here, and by the time they get a team there, the trail will be ice cold." As he prepared the phone, Catherine's gaze fell on the mantelpiece. She picked up the framed photo she had noticed earlier. It was of a younger Jack, not in uniform, but in a simple t-shirt, his arm around a woman with a warm, infectious smile. Emma, a toddler at the time, sat on his shoulders. They were all laughing. The picture radiated pure, uncomplicated happiness. "Your wife?" Catherine asked softly. Jack glanced at the photo, and the hard lines on his face softened. "That's Sarah." "She's beautiful," Catherine said, her voice catching slightly. She was trespassing on sacred ground. This cabin was their sanctuary, filled with a love she had only read about. The contrast with her own life, a calculated marriage that had ended in a sterile divorce, and now a monstrous courtship from Blackstone, was a physical ache in her chest. "She was," he said simply. The finality of that one word held a universe of pain. She must have swayed slightly, a wave of dizziness from her concussion, choosing that moment to hit. Jack was instantly at her side, his hand securely on her arm, guiding her to the rocking chair by the fire. "You need to rest, Catherine. You're pushing yourself too hard." "I don't have time to rest," she argued, though her body betrayed her. He knelt in front of her, his expression serious. "You're no good to Lily if you collapse." His gaze was intense, and for the first time, she saw something beyond the soldier and the father. She saw the man a man who understood loss, and was fighting fiercely to prevent another one. His hand was still on her arm, a point of solid grounding warmth. The intimacy of the gesture of his concern was more potent than any flattery she had ever received. She pulled back slightly, flustered by her own reaction, and nodded. "You're right." They made the call. Jack dialed the number Catherine gave him from memory. It rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Hayes?" "Walter, it's Catherine." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Catherine, good God," the old lawyer said. "The news said you've taken a leave of absence, that you're unreachable. I knew it was a lie. Are you all right? I'm safe for now, she said, speaking quickly, aware of Jack's hand signal to keep it short. Listen to me. It was Victor Blackstone. He sent men to kill me. I have my daughter with me, and we're in hiding. I need your help. I need you to start digging, quietly. Look into his import records, his holding companies, anything that doesn't look right. He's hiding something, Walter. Find it. Consider it done. Where are you? How can I reach you? You can't. Not yet. Don't try to find me. It's not safe. I'll contact you again in 2 days. Same time. Be careful, Walter. You too, Catherine. She gave Jack the nod. He ended the call, immediately popped the back off the phone, and snapped the SIM card in half. He then broke the phone itself over his knee and tossed the pieces into the fire. The plastic sizzled and melted, their only link to the outside world gone. A fragile sense of victory settled in the room. They had taken their first step. They had started to fight back. Catherine looked at Jack, the firelight flickering across his resolute face. Thank you, she said, the words carrying a weight far beyond simple gratitude. He simply nodded, his eyes on the fire. But as the last of the phone disappeared into the flames, a low, rhythmic sound began to break the silence of the forest. Faint at first, then growing steadily louder. Thump, 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 thump. Jack was on his feet in an instant, his body tense, his gaze snapping toward the window. The sound was unmistakable. It was the sound of a helicopter flying low and fast, sweeping through the mountains, and it was heading their way. The low, rhythmic thumping of the helicopter blades grew from a distant pulse to a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very logs of the cabin. Hope died in an instant, replaced by the cold, metallic taste of fear. "Kill the fire!" Jack snapped, his voice a blade cutting through the noise. He grabbed a bucket of water from the hearth meant for stray embers and upended it over the cheerful flames. The fire hissed violently, plunging the room into thick, acrid smoke and near total darkness. The only light now coming from the dying red embers. Catherine, get the girls. Keep them in the center of the room, away from the windows. Catherine didn't question him. She flew up the ladder to the loft where the terrifying noise had already awakened the children. Emma was sitting bolt upright, her eyes wide, while Lily was curled into a ball, whimpering. Catherine gathered them both her arms, a protective shield, and guided them down into the main room, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What's happening?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "It's a loud airplane, sweetie. It will be gone in a minute." Catherine lied, her voice miraculously steady. Jack was a shadow moving against the faint moonlight filtering through the windows. He pulled the heavy curtains shut, sealing them in almost complete blackness. The helicopter was nearly on top of them now, the thumping so loud it felt like a giant fist pounding on the roof. Then a brilliant white light cut through the night, a searchlight. It sliced through the treetops, turning the familiar forest into a stark alien landscape of black and white. Jack pulled them all down to the floor, covering the girls' heads with his own body. Catherine huddled beside them, her arm thrown over her daughter, her breath held tight in her chest. The beam swept past the cabin, momentarily illuminating a gap in the curtains and painting a blinding stripe of white across the floor before moving on. The sound was deafening, the vibrations rattling the dishes in the kitchen cabinets. They were being hunted from the sky. The power, the sheer audacity of it was terrifying. This was what Blackstone's wealth could buy. A private army, a helicopter, the ability to scour a mountain range in the dead of night as if looking for a lost pet. For what felt like an eternity, the helicopter circled its light, methodically sweeping the area. Catherine could feel Lily trembling uncontrollably beneath her. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying to a god she hadn't spoken to in years. She prayed for the light to stay away, for the sound to stop. She prayed for the quiet security guard who had become their only hope. Then, as slowly as it arrived, the sound began to recede. The thumping grew fainter, the light disappearing over the next ridge. They stayed on the floor, unmoving, until the helicopter was nothing more than a distant, fading pulse, finally swallowed by the silence of the forest. The quiet that returned was heavier, more menacing than before. "Are they gone?" Emma whispered from under her father's arm. Jack didn't move for a full minute, listening. Finally, he relaxed his body, though the tension never left his shoulders. "For now," he said. He rose and went to the window, peering through the smallest of gaps. The forest was dark and still once more. The phone call. Catherine breathed guilt, a physical weight. He traced the call. "Stop," Jack said, his voice firm but not unkind as he turned from the window. "We both knew it was a risk. It was a move we had to make. We just underestimated his resources." His tech team is better than I thought. He came and knelt before the girls, who were now clinging to Catherine. That was just the end of the game, he said softly. You both did great. You were very brave spies. His praise seemed to calm them, their trembling subsiding slightly. He looked at Catherine over their heads, his eyes communicating a clear message. The kids first. We panic later. Together, they got the girls settled back in the loft, tucked under a pile of heavy quilts. Jack sat with them for a few minutes, his deep, calm voice telling them a quiet story about a clever fox who outsmarted a pack of wolves. Catherine watched him from the foot of the ladder, her heart aching with a complex mix of gratitude, fear, and burgeoning admiration that was becoming harder and harder to ignore. He wasn't just their protector, he was their anchor. When he was sure they were asleep, he came back down. The dying embers of the fire cast long, dancing shadows around the room. I was so scared, Catherine admitted, her voice barely audible. Not for me. When that light came through the window, all I could think about was Lily. I know, he said, his voice laced with deep, weary understanding. It's the only thing that matters. He looked toward the loft where his own daughter slept. It's the only thing that's ever mattered. In the shared, vulnerable silence, the space between them seemed to shrink. They were no longer a CEO and a security guard. They were two parents trapped in the same nightmare, bound by the same fierce, primal need to protect their children. We have to move, she said, stating the obvious. We can't stay here. No, he agreed. That helicopter was a scout, a hunter flushing out its prey. The ground team will be next. They'll wait until dawn maybe to make their approach. A fragile, temporary relief washed over her. They had a few hours. So we leave now? She asked. In the dark, Jack was about to answer when his head snapped toward the window again. His body went rigid. He held up a hand, silencing her. He had heard something. She strained her ears, hearing nothing but the wind in the pines, and then she heard it too. It wasn't the sound of a helicopter. It was the crunch of tires on the gravel of the long, unpaved road, a low, rumbling engine growing steadily closer. He moved to the window, his form melting into the shadows. He peered through the curtain for a long, tense moment before stepping back, his face grim, carved from stone, in the faint moonlight. It's too late, he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. They're not waiting for dawn. He looked at her, and his eyes were the eyes of the SEAL she'd seen in her office, a man preparing for a fight he had never wanted but would not run from. They're here! The finality in Jack's voice was absolute. There was no escape. The fight had come to them. Catherine the loft. Now, he commanded, his voice a low whisper that somehow cut through the rising panic in the room. Take the girls, get in the far corner, and stay down. Do not make a sound. As Catherine scrambled to obey, hurrying the two terrified children up the ladder, Jack moved with chilling efficiency. He slid the heaviest piece of furniture in the cabin, a solid oak chest, in front of the door, barricading it. He wasn't just blocking the entrance, he was creating a choke point. He moved to the stone fireplace, reaching deep into the chimney flue. His fingers found a loose stone, and he pulled it free. From the dark cavity behind it, he withdrew a long canvas-wrapped object. He laid it on the floor and unrolled the canvas to reveal a vintage bolt-action hunting rifle and a small box of cartridges. It was his father's, oiled and maintained with a muscle memory that had never left him. It wasn't the M4 he was trained on, but it was a weapon. It was an answer. He chambered around, the click-clack of the bolt echoing with terrifying loudness in the silent cabin. Outside, two vehicles crunched to a stop. Headlights sliced through the window curtains, sweeping across the room before the engines and lights were cut, plunging them back into darkness. Doors opened and closed. Muted voices carried on the night air. They were surrounding the house. Jack took up a position near the main window, using the small gap in the curtains as a peephole. He counted 4 men moving with professional ease, fanning out to cover the front and sides of the cabin. They were not the same thugs from the office. These men were better trained, their movements economical and sure. Blackstone had sent his A-team. From the loft, Catherine watched her arms wrapped around the 2 girls who were huddled between her and the wall. She could see the top of Jack's head, the way he held the rifle, with a practiced stillness that was both terrifying and the only source of hope she had. He wasn't a security guard playing hero. He was a soldier on his own territory. Then a voice cut through the night, amplified by a megaphone. It was calm, reasonable, and utterly reptilian. Catherine Harper, my name is Slate. We know you're in there. We know you have the security guard and the 2 children with you. Mr. Blackstone is a reasonable man. He wants you back unharmed. This doesn't need to get ugly. Send out the security guard and we can discuss the terms of your return. The voice was a lie wrapped in civility. It was designed to sow dissent, to turn her against Jack, to make him the obstacle to a peaceful resolution. Don't listen, she whispered, though he couldn't possibly hear her. He's lying. Jack didn't move a muscle. He simply watched, breathing slowly, his cheek resting against the smooth wood of the rifle stock. He was counting, assessing, waiting. The voice came again. Reynolds, we know your name. We know about your daughter Emma. Don't be a fool. You're a security guard who got in over his head. This isn't your fight. You have 10 seconds to come out with your hands up before she gets hurt because of you. The threat against his daughter was a mistake. It stripped away the last vestiges of the quiet man Jack had tried to become and left only the cold, hard core of the warrior. He had built his entire life around protecting that little girl, and these men had just threatened to burn it all down. He saw one of the men break from cover, moving toward the side of the cabin, toward the propane tank that fed the stove. It was the move he was waiting for. He adjusted his aim slightly, his breath held steady. He wasn't aiming for the man. He was aiming for the vehicle behind him. He exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report was a deafening cannon blast inside the cabin. Outside, there was a sharp ping of metal on metal, followed by the sound of shattering glass and the hiss of air escaping a tire. The man who had been moving dove for cover, cursing. The message was delivered. There would be no negotiation. This was not a rescue. It was a siege. And the man inside was not a security guard. A tense, ringing silence followed the gunshot. From the loft, Catherine peered down. Jack hadn't moved. He was reloading the rifle, his movements fluid and economical. He ejected the spent cartridge and slid a new one home. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. In that shared glance, an entire conversation passed. I'm here. I'm not running. Protect the children. She gave him a single firm nod. We're ready. They were a unit bound by the desperate fight for their families. The men outside were silent for a long time. They knew they were facing someone with skills, someone who wouldn't be intimidated. Their approach would have to change. Jack's gaze swept the room, his eyes adjusting to the dark. He was thinking, planning his next move, when a new smell, faint at first, reached him. It was a sharp chemical odor cutting through the scent of pine and wood smoke. He moved to the front door, sniffing at the crack at the bottom. The smell was stronger there, acrid and unmistakable. Gasoline. He looked back up at Catherine, the grim realization dawning on both of them at the same time. They weren't being offered a deal. They were being given a death sentence. A new voice, the same cold one from the phone, drifted through the night. No megaphone this time, just a conversational yell. Last chance, Reynolds. Come out, or we burn you out. The acrid smell of gasoline was the smell of a closing trap. There was no way out. Not through the door, not through the window. For a split second, Catherine felt paralyzing despair. They were going to die here in this beautiful, haunted cabin because of her. But Jack didn't deal in despair. He dealt in solutions. His eyes darted around the room, not looking for an escape, but for an opening the enemy hadn't considered. His gaze landed on the large, circular bearskin rug in the center of the room. The cellar? He hissed, his voice tight with urgency. He kicked the rug aside, revealing a thick, recessed iron ring set into the floorboards. He hooked his fingers through it and heaved. A square section of the floor lifted up with a groan of old wood, revealing a black gaping hole, and a steep wooden ladder descending into darkness. It smelled of damp earth and cold stone. Go, he ordered, pointing at Catherine. Take the girls. There's an old storm hatch at the far end. It comes up behind the woodpile. Go now. Just as he spoke, a shattering crash came from the main window. A glass bottle filled with flaming liquid, a Molotov cocktail, flew through the air and smashed against the stone fireplace. Flames erupted, licking instantly up the dry wooden walls. The heat was immediate, intense. Smoke began to billow through the room. The children were screaming now, their terror raw and unrestrained. Catherine, acting on pure maternal instinct, grabbed them both. It's okay, babies. We're going down the secret slide, she yelled over the roar of the fire, pulling them toward the gaping hole. Emma, trusting her father implicitly, went first, scrambling down the ladder without hesitation. But Lily was frozen, her eyes fixed on the growing inferno. "Lily now!" Catherine screamed. Jack scooped the little girl up and practically dropped her into Catherine's waiting arms in the cellar opening. "Get her out of here!" he roared. He grabbed the heavy oak chest he'd used as a barricade, and with a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, dragged it over the open trap door just as the entire front of the cabin became engulfed in flames. For a few precious seconds, the heavy wood would shield them from the fire raining down. The cellar was pitch black. Catherine, holding a hysterical Lily, felt her way down the rickety ladder, her bare feet touching the cold, damp earth of the floor. Emma was already there, a small, brave shadow in the dark. "Daddy!" Emma cried out, her voice tight with fear. "I'm right behind you!" Jack's voice called from above, followed by the sound of him pulling the heavy trapdoor shut from below. They were plunged into absolute suffocating blackness. The roar of the fire above them was a monstrous living thing, and the heat was already seeping through the floorboards. Jack's flashlight beam cut through the darkness. "This way. Stay close." He led them through the narrow, musty-smelling root cellar. They could hear the shouts of the men outside, the crackle and groan of the cabin as the fire consumed it. It was a terrifying, hellish sound. At the far end of the cellar was a heavy, slanted wooden door. Jack put his shoulder to it and shoved. It gave way with a spray of dirt and dead leaves opening up to the cold night air behind a large, neatly stacked woodpile. They were out. The night sky was aglow with the light of the burning cabin. It was a funeral pyre, a massive, roaring diversion. The men silhouetted against the flames were all focused on the front of the structure, waiting for their trapped prey to emerge. They had no idea their targets were already gone, melting into the darkness of the forest behind them. Jack didn't pause. "We move now," he whispered, pulling Catherine to her feet. "Don't look back. Just follow me." And so began their desperate trek through the wilderness. Jack took the lead, carrying the exhausted Lily, who had cried herself into a fitful sleep. Catherine held tight to Emma's hand, her bruised ribs screaming with every step, her lungs burning from the smoke. They moved in silence, Jack navigating the treacherous terrain with an instinct that seemed almost supernatural in the darkness. He was part of this wilderness, a shadow moving through shadows. An hour later, they collapsed in a deep, moss-lined ravine, shielded from sight. The glow from the fire was a distant dying ember in the sky. They were alone, surrounded by the immense, indifferent silence of the mountains. Catherine's body gave out. The strength that had carried her this far evaporated, and she began to shake, deep, uncontrollable tremors of shock and exhaustion. "We're not going to make it," she sobbed, the words torn from her. "They'll find us. We're out here with nothing." Jack slid down the ravine wall beside her. He took off his thick canvas jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. He didn't offer empty platitudes or false hope. "Yes, we are," he said, his voice raw but unwavering. He gently took her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. "I've been in worse places than this, Catherine. I've been colder, more tired, and had people actively shooting at me. We are going to make it. I've got you. I've got all of you." She looked at him, at his exhausted but resolute face, illuminated by the faint moonlight. The lines of class and circumstance that had separated them had been burned away in the fire, leaving only this. Two people, two families bound together. In his eyes, she saw not just a soldier's promise, but a man's vow. Her shaking began to subside, replaced by a fragile, budding warmth that had nothing to do with his jacket. She squeezed his hand, a silent answer. "I trust you." They rested for only a few more minutes. The mountain air was growing colder, a damp chill that promised rain. As Jack gently roused Lily to continue their journey, the little girl let out a small, dry cough. Then another. Catherine's heart froze. She pressed her hand to Lily's forehead. It was warm, too warm. The smoke, the cold, the terror, it had all been too much for her small body. They had escaped the fire and the gunmen, but now, alone in the vast, unforgiving wilderness, they faced a new and even more relentless enemy. Lily was getting sick, and their desperate race for survival had just become a race against time. The race against the mountain was a brutal, desperate marathon. Every step was a battle. Lily's coughing grew worse, a wet, ragged sound that tore at Catherine's soul. Jack, carrying the child against his chest, moved with relentless momentum. His years of SEAL training were the only thing keeping them going as he navigated by stars and terrain, a human compass pointing toward their last desperate hope. Catherine followed her own pain, reduced to a distant roar. She held Emma's hand, her grip a lifeline. The 9-year-old never complained, her small legs pumping to keep up her faith in her father, absolute. In the darkness, Catherine saw not a child, but a mirror of Jack's resilience, quiet determination in the face of overwhelming odds. Just when Catherine thought she couldn't take another step, that her lungs would burst from the cold, thin air, Jack stopped. Through the trees, a dark, angular shape stood against the slightly less dark sky. A small one-room structure with a crooked radio antenna reaching up like a skeletal finger against the stars. "The old ranger outpost," Jack said, his voice hoarse from the frigid air. "We're here." The door was swollen shut, but Jack's shoulder thrown against it with the last of his strength forced it open with a crack of splintering wood. The air inside was stale and freezing, the smell of dust and disuse, but it was shelter. "Fire!" Jack gasped, his first priority. While Catherine settled the girls on a dusty cot, bundling them in the last of their dry clothes, he worked on the old wood stove. Using his knife, he shaved tinder from a dry log left inside. With a spark from his multi-tool, he coaxed a tiny flame to life. The small victory felt monumental. As the fragile warmth began to push back the oppressive cold, Jack turned his attention to Lily. He used the last of the supplies from his go bag, a small medical kit that was a miniature marvel of efficiency. He administered a child's dose of aspirin to fight the fever and used an inhaler to help open her airways equipment he carried for Emma's seasonal allergies. "It's smoke inhalation and the onset of pneumonia," he said grimly, his voice low so only Catherine could hear. "I can keep her stable for a few hours, but she needs a real doctor. She needs a hospital." Their only hope was the radio. It was an ancient military surplus machine powered by a hand-cranked generator. While Catherine held the flashlight, Jack worked on the corroded terminals, his fingers surprisingly nimble for a man of his size. For 20 agonizing minutes, the only sound was his quiet cursing and the scratch of metal on metal. Then a crackle of static broke the silence. "Got it," he whispered. He handed the microphone to Catherine. "Walter Hayes? No one else?" Her voice trembling but clear-cut through the static. "This is Catherine Harper, connecting to Walter Hayes." 3 tense seconds passed before an older man's voice replied. "Catherine, good God, where are you?" She poured out the entire story, her words a torrent of information. The attack at her office, their escape to Jack's apartment, the cabin, the fire, their location at the abandoned outpost. She gave Walter the authority to act, to unleash the legal and media storm she knew he was capable of. "You have the files?" Walter asked, his voice sharp with urgency. "Yes," Catherine replied. "The encryption algorithms and the transaction records. Everything's on the flash drive in Lily's locket, the one my father gave her." Jack's eyebrows rose slightly. He hadn't known that the little girl had been carrying such crucial evidence all along. "He tried to kill me, Walter," Catherine finished, her voice breaking with fury and exhaustion. "He tried to kill my daughter, burn it all down. Everything he has, burn it to the ground." The line was silent for a long moment, and then her mentor's voice came back no longer gravelly, but cold as steel. "With pleasure. Stay where you are. Help is coming." After the call, there was nothing left to do but wait. Exhausted beyond measure, they huddled together by the growing warmth of the stove. Jack wrapped his arm around Catherine, pulling her and the 2 sleeping girls closer. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the hard muscle, a comfort, a reality, in a world gone mad. The soldier, the CEO, the security guard, all of it fell away. They were just 2 people keeping their family warm in the dark. Sunrise found Victor Blackstone in his private gym, sweating through his morning routine on a treadmill that cost more than most people's cars. His personal trainer stood nearby, offering encouragement that Blackstone barely heard. His mind was elsewhere, focused on the upcoming press conference where he would announce his Senate campaign, the first step toward the White House. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His head of security, Slate, entered, his expression grim. Blackstone hit the stop button and stepped off the treadmill, grabbing a towel. "Tell me you found them," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Sir, we lost the team at the cabin. All 4 men. Blackstone froze mid-wipe. "What do you mean, lost?" The fire spread faster than expected. They were trying to secure the perimeter when the propane tank exploded. No survivors. And Harper, "No bodies recovered yet. The local fire department is still containing the blaze. Blackstone threw the towel against the wall. How does a security guard outmaneuver 8 professional operatives in 2 separate encounters? Sir, our background check on Reynolds was incomplete. Slate pulled out a tablet and brought up a file. He wasn't just Navy. He was SEAL Team 6, 18 years multiple combat deployments, specialized in hostage extraction and covert operations, expert medic, 3 silver stars, 2 purple hearts. He paused. He's not a security guard who got lucky. He's a ghost who's been hiding in plain sight. Blackstone paced, processing this new information. Double the bounty. 5 million. I want them found before they can talk to anyone. As Slate left to implement the orders, Blackstone's phone rang. His campaign manager's name flashed on the screen. Edward, I'm rather busy at the moment. Turn on Channel 7. Edward's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. Now! Blackstone grabbed the remote and switched on the gym's wall-mounted television. The screen showed a distinguished elderly man in a tailored suit, standing on the steps of the federal building surrounded by reporters. Walter Hayes, Catherine's mentor, and one of the most respected legal minds in the country. That old bastard, Blackstone hissed. Hayes' voice was powerful despite his age, each word precise and damning. My client, Catherine Harper, CEO of Harper Enterprises, has disappeared under suspicious circumstances following what appears to be an orchestrated attack. Before going into hiding, she authorized me to present evidence to the FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding extensive money laundering, weapons trafficking, and corporate espionage allegations against Victor Blackstone and his companies. Blackstone's knuckles whitened around the remote. Ms. Harper's security team uncovered documentation that directly links Blackstone Industries to illegal arms sales in sanctioned countries and the systematic bribery of government officials. The encryption algorithms developed by Harper Enterprises were being targeted by Mr. Blackstone, not for their commercial applications, but to secure illicit international financial transactions away from regulatory oversight. Hayes held up a flash drive. This contains transaction records, coded communications, and bank transfers that Ms. Harper recovered from Blackstone's own systems during their merger discussions. She believes her life and her daughter's life are in danger due to her possession of this evidence. The reporters erupted with questions. Hayes held up a hand for silence. The FBI has opened an official investigation. Agents are executing search warrants at Blackstone Industries headquarters as I speak. I call on Victor Blackstone to come forward and address these allegations immediately. The phone slipped from Blackstone's hand, clattering to the floor. His campaign manager's tinny voice continued from the speaker. Victor, the press conference is canceled. The donors are pulling out. What the hell is going on? But Blackstone wasn't listening anymore. His carefully constructed world was unraveling in real time before his eyes. He pressed a button on his desk. Get the jet ready, he said to his assistant. We're leaving for Geneva in 30 minutes. At that same moment in the mountains, help arrived with the first gray light of dawn. Not Blackstone's men, but the flashing red and blue lights of state police vehicles led by Walter Hayes himself. The elderly lawyer climbed out of the lead car with surprising agility, his face lined with concern. A medical team rushed into the ranger outpost. They found Jack standing guard at the door, the hunting rifle still in his hands, eyes alert despite his exhaustion. When he recognized Hayes from Catherine's description, he lowered the weapon. They're inside, he said simply. The paramedics went to work immediately. Lily's condition had worsened during the night, her breathing shallow and labored. They administered oxygen and intravenous antibiotics before preparing her for transport. Catherine refused to leave her daughter's side, her face drawn with worry, but her spine straight. We need to airlift her to the hospital, the lead paramedic said. Jack nodded his arm protectively around Emma. Go, he told Catherine. We'll follow. Catherine hesitated, torn between staying with Lily and leaving Jack and Emma behind. Jack squeezed her hand. I'll keep her safe, he promised, and Catherine knew he was talking about Emma too. We'll be right behind you. The helicopter took off with Catherine and Lily aboard, bound for the nearest trauma center. Jack and Emma followed in a police cruiser, his arm around his daughter as she leaned against him emotionally and physically drained. Is it over, Daddy? Emma whispered. Jack looked down at her, the child who had faced so much without complaint. The hard part is, he said, choosing his words carefully, now we just need to make sure everyone gets better. For the first time in 48 hours, he allowed himself to breathe. They had survived. Against all odds, they had made it. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospitals, legal statements, and news reports. Walter's attack was surgical and devastating. Armed with Catherine's testimony and the evidence that she had secretly gathered during her business negotiations with Blackstone, he exposed the billionaire's entire operation to the world. Catherine explained to investigators how she had discovered discrepancies in Blackstone's financial reports during due diligence for a potential partnership. Her cybersecurity team had followed the trail and uncovered a complex web of shell companies and encrypted communications that led back to arms deals in conflict zones and sanctioned countries. When Blackstone realized she knew too much, he had switched from business proposition to romantic pursuit, trying to secure her silence through marriage. When that failed, he resorted to elimination. The story of the billionaire's monstrous obsession was a media firestorm. His empire, built on a foundation of lies and illegal dealings, collapsed under the weight of his own evil. His assets were frozen, his companies placed under investigation, his political ambitions destroyed. But Victor Blackstone himself had vanished. His private jet had departed for Switzerland, but he never arrived. International law enforcement agencies issued alerts, but the man who had once controlled billions had gone to ground, using his vast resources to disappear. Jack was hailed as a hero in the press once his identity became known. Job offers flooded in from security firms and private military contractors, all eager to have a man of his caliber on their payroll. He declined them all. He had no desire to return to that world. His only concern was Emma, and ensuring she felt safe again after the trauma they'd endured. The attack had brought something unexpected into their lives, however, a connection neither Jack nor Catherine had anticipated. During Lily's hospital stay, Emma had refused to leave her new friend's side. The two girls had formed an unbreakable bond forged in fire and fear. They were inseparable, Emma taking on the role of protective older sister with solemn determination. And between the adults, something equally unexpected had developed. They had seen each other at their most vulnerable and their most courageous. They had fought side by side. They had shared a trust that went beyond words. 1 month later, on a bright, crisp autumn afternoon, Catherine sat on a park bench, watching Lily and Emma chase each other through a pile of fallen leaves, their laughter echoing in the clear air. Lily had made a full recovery, her resilient young body bouncing back from the pneumonia that had threatened her life. The bruises on Catherine's face had faded, though she still felt a twinge in her ribs when she laughed too hard. Jack sat down beside her, handing her a warm cup of coffee. He looked different without the weight of immediate danger on his shoulders. The hard lines around his eyes had softened. He just looked like a father watching his daughter play. "I got a call from Harper Enterprises today," he said with a wry smile. "They offered me the position of Chief Security Officer, triple my old salary." Catherine laughed, a genuine sound that still surprised her with its freedom. She had her life back, her company, her power. But the fire had burned something away in her too, a cold ambition, a need for control. It had been replaced by something warmer, something real. "I'm glad," she said, "because I have a proposition for you." Jack raised an eyebrow. "I already told you, Catherine, I don't want your money or a job." "I know," she said, her smile soft. She turned to face him, her expression open and vulnerable. "That's not the kind of proposition I had in mind." She took a deep breath, her heart in her throat. "For years, I've built an empire. I've merged companies, acquired assets. It's what I do. But I've been doing it all wrong." She took his hand, the same calloused hand that had pulled her from the fire, that had held her steady in the dark. "This isn't a business deal, Jack. It's a merger, a full partnership. 2 single-parent households, a combined total of 2 very awesome little girls, and 2 people who found each other in the middle of a nightmare." She took another breath, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Marry me." Jack stared at her, truly shocked for the first time since she'd met him. He looked at her earnest, hopeful face, then over at their 2 daughters, who were now holding hands, a perfect tiny picture of their new blended family. A slow smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes. "Catherine Harper," he said, his voice full of a warmth she had only dreamed of. "A full partnership is the only deal I'd ever be willing to accept." He squeezed her hand, and together they watched their children play, the sounds of their laughter, the only thing that mattered. They had walked through fire, But on the other side, in the most unexpected way, they had finally found their way home. 3,000 miles away, in a luxury resort hidden deep in the mountains of an unnamed country, Victor Blackstone sat on the terrace of his private villa. His appearance had changed, hair dyed and cut short, a beard covering his once clean-shaven face, subtle cosmetic surgery altering the shape of his nose and jawline. The man the world knew as Victor Blackstone technically no longer existed. He sipped his scotch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. A tablet lay on the table beside him, open to a news article about Katherine Harper's upcoming wedding to former Navy SEAL Jack Reynolds. The couple looked radiant, their children beside them all smiles and hope for the future. Victor's hand tightened around the glass until his knuckles turned white. The empire he'd spent decades building was gone. His reputation was in tatters. His grand political ambitions had crumbled to dust, and it was all because of her. Because she'd said no, because she'd thought she could destroy him. A man in a dark suit approached, standing at a respectful distance. "Sir, the new identities and accounts are in place. The team you requested has been assembled." "And the other matter?" Victor asked, not looking away from the tablet. "We've located a property half a mile from their new home. Surveillance is in place." Victor nodded, a thin smile spreading across his face. "Good. We'll give them their wedding. Let them think they've won. Let them build their perfect little life together." He drained his glass. "And then we'll take it all away." "Shall I make the preparations to return to the States?" the man asked. "Not yet," Victor said. "Patience is a virtue after all. We have time." He traced a finger over the image of Catherine's face. "And revenge is a dish best served cold." 6 months later, on a perfect spring day, Katherine stood in the garden of her country home, surrounded by flowers and those she loved. She had sold her penthouse, unable to return to the scene of the attack. The new place was smaller, but warmer, filled with light and laughter. She watched as Emma helped Lily adjust the flower crown in her hair. Both girls wore matching blue dresses, their excitement palpable. "Is it time yet?" Lily asked for the dozenth time. "Almost, sweetheart," Katherine replied, her heart full to bursting. Walter Hayes approached, looking distinguished in his suit, a rare smile on his weathered face. "The guests are seated. The groom is waiting. Are you ready?" Katherine took one last look at her reflection in the garden pond. The woman who stared back was changed stronger, more at peace than she had ever been. "I've been ready since the moment I woke up in his apartment," she said. Walter offered his arm, stepping in to fill the role her father would have played. Together they walked toward the small gathering of friends and family assembled on the lawn. At the makeshift altar stood Jack, his usually serious face transformed by a smile that took her breath away. He wore a simple, dark suit, nothing like the Navy security uniform she had first seen him in. As she reached him, he took her hands in his touch as steady and sure as it had been in the darkest moments of their ordeal. "I never thought I'd have a second chance," he whispered for her ears only. "Neither did I," she replied, squeezing his hands. "But here we are." The ceremony was brief and heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Emma and Lily erupted in cheers before anyone else could applaud. Jack lifted both girls into his arms, including them in the first embrace of their new family. Later, as the reception wound down and the stars began to appear in the evening sky, Jack and Katherine slipped away to the edge of the garden. In the distance, they could see the mountains where they had fought for their lives. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked quietly. "Blackstone, do you think he's really gone?" Jack's arm tightened around her waist. "I think a man like that doesn't just disappear, but I also think he'd be a fool to come after us again." "Why's that?" she asked, looking up at him. "Because now he wouldn't just be facing a security guard who got lucky," Jack said, his voice low and serious. "He'd be facing a man with everything to lose, and there's nothing more dangerous." Katherine nodded her head against his shoulder. "I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear helicopter blades." "I know," he said gently. "I've seen you. But that's normal. What we went through, it leaves marks. Not all scars are visible." His fingers traced the faint line above her eyebrow where the cut had healed. "But they fade, and they remind us of what we survived." They watched as Emma and Lily danced together on the lawn, their shadows long in the setting sun. "I was dead inside before that night," Jack admitted, "going through the motions for Emma's sake, but not really living." "We saved each other," Catherine said, "and now we have the rest of our lives to be grateful for that." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. The battle-hardened seal and the fiercely protective father were both visible in his eyes, along with something new. A peace, a joy that hadn't been there before. "I promised you once," he said, his voice deep with emotion, "that I would protect you and Lily to my last drop of blood. That promise hasn't changed. It never will." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that experience had carved there. "I know, and I promise the same to you and Emma. We protect what's ours. Always." Their kiss was a seal on that promise, a commitment more binding than the vows they had just exchanged. Above them, the first stars of evening appeared, witnesses to a new beginning that had been forged in fire and tempered by love. From the lawn came the sound of children's laughter, Emma's voice calling for them to come back. Jack and Catherine walked in hand toward the light and music toward the future they had fought so hard to deserve. Across the street, in the darkened room of a recently purchased house, a camera lens tracked their movement, capturing every moment. The man behind the camera lowered it, making a note in a small black book. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unlisted number. Status update. He typed a quick response. Wedding complete. Normal activities resumed. Security systems in place, but minimal. They believe they're safe. The reply came seconds later. Continue surveillance. Phase 2 begins soon. The man closed his phone and raised his camera again, focusing on the happy family, celebrating their new beginning, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. 3 years passed in relative peace. The Reynolds family settled into a rhythm of normalcy that had once seemed impossible. Jack established a security consulting business that allowed him to work primarily from home. Catherine continued to lead Harper Enterprises, but with a new philosophy that prioritized balance over expansion. The girls thrived in their blended family, sharing a room by choice, even though the house had plenty of space. On Lily's 10th birthday, they gathered around a cake adorned with candles. Emma, now 12, and growing more like her father every day, stood beside her sister as Lily closed her eyes tight, made her wish, and blew them all out in one determined breath. Their home rang with laughter and the chaotic joy of children's birthday parties. Friends from school, neighbors, and chosen family filled the rooms with chatter and warmth. In the midst of it all, Jack caught Catherine's eye across the kitchen and mouthed a silent, "I love you." She smiled back, her heart still skipping a beat at these small moments of connection. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the girls were asleep, Catherine found Jack on the porch swing, gazing at the stars. She settled beside him, fitting perfectly into the space under his arm. "Happy?" he asked, his voice a low rumble in his chest. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. They sat in comfortable silence, the rhythm of the swing lulling them both into a peaceful state. Catherine marveled at how normal this felt now, this quiet domestic happiness that had once seemed so foreign to her driven corporate mindset. "Did I ever tell you?" Jack said, suddenly breaking the silence. "What went through my mind that first night when I saw you in that office fighting against those men?" Catherine shook her head, curious. "I thought, there's a woman who will never stop fighting for what she loves. I didn't know then that one day that would include me." Catherine leaned up to kiss him, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Best merger I ever negotiated," she murmured against his lips. From inside the house came the soft sound of footsteps. Lily appeared in the doorway, her birthday crown still perched precariously on her head. "I can't sleep," she announced, climbing without invitation onto Jack's lap. He adjusted automatically, making room for her. "Birthday excitement?" Catherine asked, smoothing her daughter's hair. Lily nodded, then grew serious, her young face thoughtful in the porch light. "Dad," she said the word, still new enough on her lips to make Jack's heart clench. "I remembered something today, about the bad men." Jack and Catherine exchanged quick glances. They had been careful not to dwell on those events, allowing the girls to process and move forward. The nightmares had eventually faded for both children, replaced by the security of their new family. "What did you remember, sweetheart?" Jack asked carefully. "I remember being really scared," Lily said slowly. "But then you came, and I just knew everything would be okay." She yawned, already half asleep again, in the safety of his arms. "I wished for that today, that you'd always be here to make the bad things go away." Catherine watched as Jack's eyes filled with tears he wouldn't let fall. He pressed a kiss to the top of Lily's head, his voice rough with emotion. That's a wish I can promise will come true. As they carried Lily back to bed, tucking her in beside a sleeping Emma Catherine realized that true strength wasn't found in boardrooms or battlefields. It was here in these quiet moments of fierce protection and gentle love. Victor Blackstone might still be out there somewhere nursing his wounds and plotting his revenge. Sometimes she thought she caught glimpses of unfamiliar cars on their street, or felt eyes watching from a distance. Jack had installed state-of-the-art security systems throughout their home, and they maintained certain precautions, old habits from their days on the run. But they refused to live in fear. They had earned this happiness, this peace. Whatever came next, they would face it together as they had faced everything else. As Jack switched off Lily's nightlight and quietly closed the girl's bedroom door, Catherine took his hand, leading him back to their own room. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But tonight, in the peaceful quiet of their home, they had everything they had ever truly needed. Each other, their daughters, and the promise of tomorrow. The last drop of blood Jack had once vowed. But life had given them something far more precious than sacrifice. It had given them love, fierce, protective, and enduring. A love that had been tested in fire and emerged unbreakable. And if that love was ever tested again, they would be ready.